some of the things administratively can be cared for on your behalf. And it allows you to focus, which is on the most important thing in business, which is people. And I think those skills will translate to anything else you do. Like you running a high-tech firm right now have better people skills than most people running high-tech firms because you were in such a people-oriented business before. Yeah. And I didn't realize, how much I would learn there. And so I think that was the first thing. It took me by surprise. And the more people you work with, the more complicated it becomes.
Welcome to Raw and Real Entrepreneurship, the show that dares to bring no-nonsense insight to those who have the courage to start, grow, and scale a business. I'm your host, Susan Sly. Well, hey, what is up, Raw and Real Entrepreneurs? Wherever you are in the world, I want you just to give yourself a pat on the back and, just say, hey, I'm here and I'm listening and I'm tuning in because why? There's something I want. I want to start a business. I want to grow a business. My business has plateaued. I want to get out of a rut. And we're here to give you raw and real entrepreneurship. And if you haven't already, head on over to susansly.com. If you have an idea that you want to turn into a tech business, I have founded a brand new incubator for people just like you. So check it out on susansly.com. And we come alongside you, my team. We're not only going to tell you what to do, we're actually going to help you build the technology, help you go out there and fundraise, and help you grow and scale that business to get it all the way to exit, which is so fun. Now, my guest today, I woke up this morning and I was reading his bio, I was watching his videos, and I'm like, this is a man after my own heart. So he is a multipreneur. He has had many different kinds of businesses, and I'm just going to read you some of his career high points, and I think he's just getting started, truly. So he has over 30 years of business experience. He has built 8 businesses in total, including spas, my favorite business, gyms, so we share that in common, construction company, no, have not done that, wholesaling company, coaching, have done that, and consulting agency, I've done that one too. He's successfully exited 3 of them. He's still running 4 of them remotely. He's generating multiple millions of dollars annually. So he's the real deal. And this man could retire at any moment, but he loves the thrill of being an entrepreneur and mentoring entrepreneurs. And he also has played polo in many different countries. We're going to find out much more about that. So my guest today is the one and only Todd Randall. So Todd, who is coming live from Florida, and if you're on YouTube today, I'm live from one of the offices at Radius AI. So Todd and he's at his home office. I'm in his old stomping grounds of Scottsdale, Arizona. But Todd, thank you for being on Raw and Real Entrepreneurship. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Susan. What a great intro. Appreciate that. We do share some fun things in common. I look forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, and I've never played polo, so we're going to have a lot of we're going to have a lot of things to discuss. As you know, I said, we have people who are 8 years old listening right now in the car with mom or dad. We have people in their 70s and 80s saying, hey, I feel like I still have something in me. I want to do something. And in fact, my dad, Joe, shouts out to him. Every week he sends the show out to all of his friends. So if you're a friend of my dad, shouts out to you. Thanks for being a friend of Joe.
Shout out to friends of my dad.
Yeah. So Todd, what was the very first business you started?
When I was a kid, I remember I did have kind of an entrepreneurial spirit. There was a time where my parents asked me to do some chores around the house, and I didn't really want to do it, so I asked my brother to do it, and he wasn't willing. And I had a pack of M&Ms, and so I told him I'd give him 7. I had some big number, 7 M&Ms if he did a chore for me, and he did. And I thought, this is easy, so I'll just go into the cabinet and take a bunch of candy. And we started walking down the street, selling little pieces of candy for a nickel or a dime or whatever. And my parents, you found out we were doing it and pulled us back in and said, look, I have some concerns about what you think is business. And they tried to, sit down and teach me some business principles based on that. But I was pretty early. I did a bunch of sales in high school and college. I tried network marketing a few times. We would buy antiques in Pennsylvania and resell them just on the curb, a little bit like the Amazon flip business there is now. So I probably had 4 or 5 solid tries at business before I was in college.
Wow, and the little kids selling candy, right? And you and I are probably very close in age, so we grew up in the time where what was that can one year Halloween there was some candy that had poison in it, or there was something that happened.
I can't remember what that
there was a big scandal, and so I imagine that that either happened like soon after you were selling the candy or right around that time, which is yes.
Soon after. I'm glad the FBI didn't find out. They might have fingered me to be the perp on that.
Yeah, no, thank God for that. Do you think, hundreds of interviews that I've done, and I keep asking, what was your first business? And we've had so many different businesses. Yeah. And I interviewed the kid who did the fidget spinner, and he did that in his high school basement on a 3D printer and went on to make millions. I don't even think he's working anymore. This was not that long ago. But there's this argument. Entrepreneurs are born or they can be made. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I have a strong opinion about this one because I'm not an entrepreneur in so many ways. I had great aspirations of being an entrepreneur as a kid, like I said, and I experimented with business ideas, and none of them really took. And what I realized at the time, early, I'm so glad for this revelation, is that business was in fact a set of skills. It wasn't just ambition, which I had in spades, right? But it wasn't just ambition. There are a series of fundamental business skills that one needs to earn, practice, refine, and use. And I went and I interviewed entrepreneurs and I talked to lots of people who had their own businesses, and I could tell that they weren't people who just invented stuff. Because people have inventions all the time. And I get so mad when people dismiss children or people in their 70s or 80s as entrepreneurs, as if they can't. Like, they have ideas just like anyone else. And in fact, who better suited in some cases, right, than the young or the old to be entrepreneurs because of their willingness to be creative, and especially for the older entrepreneurs, for all their experience to map to it. So for me, as a young adult, I actually knew I wanted to be a business person. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I decided not to for 15 years. I went to corporate and got the skills I was looking for because I just wasn't confident enough, and I didn't like the anxiety of just trying, knowing that the hills were always going to be so steep for me.
It's interesting because before the show we were talking about risk, and I had Mia Hewitt on the show, and she worked corporately for many years before she took the leap into full-time entrepreneurship. And she started her side hustle, and then it was growing, and then she got to the point where it's like, I can't navigate a full-time job and kids and the side hustle, and my side hustle is now making enough money. But let's talk about that. How did you finally get to the point working in corporate for 15 years where you transition to an entrepreneur? Because many of our listeners are in that place. They either have a full-time job and a side hustle, or they have a full-time job and they want the courage to leave. So how did you do it?
Oh, this is one of my favorite stories. It gives me goosebumps just to think about it because it was a real transition in my life. I always knew, like I said, I wanted to be a business person, and I didn't feel like I had the skills to enter the market. I had friends who were very good at business, and for whatever reason, just didn't feel qualified. So I stuck and I learned, and I had lots of mentors, and I was doing pretty well at my gig. When I was in my mid-30s, I really caught the eye. I was in a $300 billion company at the time, and the CEO kind of handpicked me for a project that was really out of my league. And it was so satisfying to be valued for my contributions. They sent me to Europe where I was writing this big business plan. And they said, look, if this business plan is a good idea, we want you to stay in Europe and run this new division. And I couldn't have been more honored and flattered by all that. And that was right in 2007. That was right before the financial crash. And they saw the crash coming. They felt unease from the markets, and they said, look, we're just not going to move forward with any projects outside North America, so Todd, please come home. And I was so sad because this was the most satisfying thing I'd ever done before, and I was getting patted on the back, and I was getting all the kudos. It made me feel like an expert. It was really great. And so they could tell that I was a little down about this, and I said, tell you what, I'm gonna go over to Paris for a month or so, and I'm just going to chill and count it as vacation, count it as time off. I know that I need this to kind of balance myself before I come back. And they were so generous with me and gracious. I thought it was amazing. So I went to Paris, And I studied language in the morning, and I stayed with a host family through the school that I was studying language, and then I went and played golf with friends in the afternoon or went to museums and all the stuff that tourists do in Paris. And at the end of the month, I was blissfully happy. I thought, this is really great. I love my friends here. I love, understanding another language. I love, the big cosmopolitan environment. I was filled with arts and culture. And at the end of the month, the total tally for 4 weeks in Paris was like $2,700. Now, for context, this is not that long ago. This is only 15 years ago, right? And I was a very high income earner at the time. And $2,700 a month was a very, very small percentage of what I was making every month. And the revelation to me is, oh, wow. Wow, like this is the happiest month I've had maybe ever. And it's actually not as expensive as I thought it was. So why am I striving just for the big paycheck that I want? And I realized then that the title was not as important as I thought it was. Working for a big company was not as important as I thought it was, because I was just faced with a situation where I could, make a very low income and be so blissfully happy that it was a revelation to me. And the minute I got home, I started researching. I'm like, gosh, I know that there are opportunities that I could start today, that I don't have to be the next, Bill Gates or the next Steve Jobs or the next Mark Zuckerberg. I could start a modest business and make the kind of income that I know can make me happy. And that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey.
I love that. So now say something in French.
Je suis désolé, mais mon français n'est pas très bon.
Moi aussi. C'était trop longtemps que je parle français tout le temps.
Ooh, another two, not bad at all.
Oh,
yeah, when I was working there, we were working only in French because we were working in the middle of the country where English was not quite as prevalent, and it was amazing. There's something about learning another language because I love to understand people. I love this conversation you and I are having now because we're helping each other understand the world in a slightly different way. And I feel like if you're someplace where you speak the language with other people, the perspective is markedly different, right? And there's so many interesting lessons to be learned from it. So.
Well, I love that, the conversation we're having, and sometimes it does, like this is raw and real entrepreneurship. Sometimes it does take that life event, and the listeners know, or if you're a new listener, you don't know, but the listeners know that have been here for a while, and some of you have been here for quite some time, that in 2016, when I nearly died coming back from a trip from Africa, and I had been to Africa many times, that's when I had my moment going, wait a minute, I'm not feeling fulfilled. I had been sharing the stage with Tony Robbins and Jack Canfield and traveling all over the world and growing this great business, but I wasn't fulfilled. And part of the reason I wasn't fulfilled is because I wasn't feeling challenged. And it's amazing when you say, hey, I want to be challenged. It's amazing what shows up for you. So you come back from Paris, and then what was the first business you started?
Oh, okay. So some of your listeners, I hope this really resonates with them because I was stuck. I was stuck here. I had spent 15 years in a corporate structure. I'd got a big, fancy, expensive MBA. I had all kinds of training and mentorship and leadership training, and I didn't have a good idea to start a business myself. So many folks at that age do have opportunities to just present themselves, and you take them, right? Your division is being dismissed by your boss, so you offer to take it. You get some capital and you go run it as a separate company. Or you have a great idea because your company doesn't invest in it. Or you have a great idea at home, a great invention or something. I didn't have anything, and I struggled because I thought that's what I needed. But in the end, I just went and looked at how other people did it. I talked to friends who own businesses. Hey, what kind of business do you have? And I found lots of friends who have businesses just buying things and reselling it, or laundromats or restaurants or what have you. And some of them were really, really happy doing their own thing. And so what I decided was that my ego didn't need to be vainly part of the equation. I didn't need to be a hero or a Mark Zuckerberg or somebody famous for inventing something. I really did want to run a business for the reasons that I just described before. Being able to enjoy the arts or time with friends or another culture or living remotely, like those are things that meant so much to me that I was willing to sacrifice income or title or prestige for that. And I think that's the first battle you have to work with yourself, is you have to be true about what you want, because the world wants lots of things for you. Right? And at some point you got to stand up for yourself and have a spine and say, yeah, that's great. That's not what I'm looking for. Right? I would rather have more time in other countries.
So even though you're like me, you're in Gen X, it's like that's how Gen Z or Gen Z thinks. They think that they have a much more rational appearance of the world, because it's not about a dream business. There is no like, oh, I have my dream business. No, you don't. You have a lifestyle that you are in love with, that is a dream that you think is a result of that business. And so and that's the thing. And I can promise everyone that the moment you let go of that, oh, it's going to be my dream business, because one thing I've always said is your first one might not be, the second one might not be, and you're never, if it is your dream, you're gonna have a hard time letting go of it. And there's a time when it is time to let go, because you've either become redundant in your business, or it's no longer exciting for you. You're not feeling fulfilled. So what was the first thing you did, the antique flipping coming out of this?
No, this was, I went to spas. So what I decided in the end is I looked at hundreds of businesses. I evaluated all kinds of stuff, and I wanted something that spoke to me. Now, I came from healthcare, and spas were in the wellness zone, and it felt good to me. And I've always been athletic in my life, and I've used massage therapy as a means of therapy for that. So I was connected to it. And so I opened a spa, and it wasn't my spa. It wasn't Todd's spa. I bought a brand and used a franchise license for it. I was just really jonesing on running the business. That was important to me. And what I promised myself is, look, if I do this, I'm missing some prestige points because it's not my business. I'm missing some prestige points because I'm not vice president of what's and such, anymore. And I don't have a big expense account and the things that I liked about my last job. So I was going to allow myself some fancy, cool hobby. And that's when I started riding horses. So I opened this business. It was a spa. And I had, at one point, 100 staff members that were delivering as good care as we could possibly do in our very local area. And it wasn't that sexy. It was just good people skills, good financial acumen, and then picking up the trash on the floor when you walk in. Those were the skills required to run that business well. And we excelled as a result of just, focusing.
And that is so important, Todd, because I had a show, and it was just on franchises, and it was with one of the top concierges for franchises, and what she does is matches a person, their personality, with the right franchise opportunity. And many of the listeners know too, I got a lot of my background experience in network marketing. I helped generate about $1.7 billion in sales for one health and wellness company. And there are a lot of skills, and the wonderful thing about franchising, about network marketing, is you have a lane, and things outside of your lane you don't have to worry about. Supply chain and marketing materials and things like that. So you only have to focus on essentially sales, generating new customers. And it's a great training ground. And I stand on my little soapbox and say, hey, if you're nervous about business, these are, it's about the levels of risk. So what was one of the things that happened with that franchise that you didn't expect or didn't anticipate? Because here's this guy, I've got an MBA, I worked for a massive corporation, I write business plans, I open new markets, and then suddenly I have this franchise. What's something that happened that you were like, oh my gosh, I didn't anticipate that one?
Yeah, I can think two things right off the top of my head. One, you just inspired me to comment on, which is that it's about people. Like if you think about real estate and insurance and network marketing and franchising, some of the things administratively can be cared for on your behalf. And it allows you to focus, which is on the most important thing in business, which is people. And I think those skills will translate to anything else you do. Like you running a high-tech firm right now have better people skills than most people running high-tech firms because you were in such a people-oriented business before. And I didn't realize, how much I would learn there. And so I think that was the first thing. It took me by surprise. And the more people you work with, the more complicated it becomes. So equal opportunity and HR rules and class action lawsuits to be aware of. and workers' comp issues and stuff like that. So I think as a small business owner, you want to be thinking about staffing, about inspiring your team, and about mitigating risk so that you have an environment where people can thrive without anxiety.
I love that you mentioned that. One of the first hires I made at Radius. So we, like many startups, right? So you have your idea, it's on a napkin, then it goes to PowerPoint. We're serious now. We're on a PowerPoint, and we're going and raising money, and we're spending most of it in DevOps, legal, that kind of thing. So when we actually got to a place where we were going to cover our burn, the guys, I have 4 co-founders, and they're like, okay, here's our hiring list. And it's like front-end engineer, back-end engineer, blah, 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 and data scientist. Who do you want to hire? I said, an attorney. And they're like, we have law firms. I said, no, I want an in-house general counsel. And to that point, because things that people don't think about when they're thinking about their dream business, like to your point, lawsuits, HR issues, is your D&O insurance up to date? Do you have an employee manual? Like all of those things that come with, you want to create that safe place for the people that you work with. But if you don't have someone sort of with you, coming alongside you, making sure that all of those things are there, that's the thing people, it's Ron Real Entrepreneurship, that's the thing people don't think about.
I did not appreciate how important loyalty was. I never wanted to run a business that felt like the mafia, where people had to pick sides. And so I tried desperately not to have one of those, like the corporate environment I was in before. But I will tell you that I value loyalty more than any other skill that someone can have. If they come in with a good attitude and are in alignment with, the business interests, that gets them a lot more points than competence or experience or what have you.
I feel that you can teach people any skill, and I'm proof of that as a AI company who hasn't written a line of code since '92, which is true. I used to code on Sun Microsystems, dating myself, but wow. And here I am, and the
network is the computer.
Yeah, exactly. And so thinking about it, anyone can learn a skill, but you can't teach a person heart. Yeah. They come with the right heart, and that is so key. So after the spa business, what was the next one?
So I opened gyms then. And this was the next real phase in my entrepreneurial career, because once I started one business, I was in it all the time, and I was proud of all the details, and I knew every aspect of the business, but all the decisions kind of landed with me. And I started to be trapped in this, where nobody could make a decision without Todd around. I couldn't really grow as a result. And so we started really practicing. I had a manager that I liked a lot. Bless her heart, Carolina. She put up with a lot from me. And she insisted. She said, look, we need to work something out, because I can take on more and you're not letting me have it. And the business is suffering as a result. So we worked really hard in this whole delegation concept, where she was taking on more responsibility, and allowed me to grow. And so I opened up a second spa, and then a gym, and then another gym. And then I started a consulting practice, and I brokered a few sales of small tech companies. And I was able to do that because we had good delegation skills in place. And I think maybe that's the next biggest lesson that I learned in small business, is you do have to have folks around you that you eventually trust and partner with. Like, these are folks that were in the room when any major decision was made, so that they knew how to execute it. They were in alignment with what my goals were, because they helped me decide them. You know what I mean?
And so when was the moment you looked yourself in the mirror, and it could have been, one day brushing your teeth, and you said, in order for things to change, I have to change?
I remember this day, actually. Carolina had worked for me for 3 or 4 years at the time. And she was just becoming frustrated, because she kept asking me for things that only I could do in my mind. And I wasn't getting back to her in time. I wasn't timely enough, and she was suffering. And we lost a key staff member that she really wanted as part of her team, because I wasn't helping her finish the deal, right? Execute and get her on board. And she came to me, and it was our come to Jesus moment, where she's like, I promise you can be better. And I know I'm maybe I'm stepping out of line here, but I need to advise you in a way that you may not see how many decisions are not getting made here. And I admired and respected that about her, because she was willing to sacrifice her relationship with a business because of her relationship with me. And who doesn't want a business where relationships are that important, right? So that was the moment. She essentially called me to the carpet and helped me understand how important it was, and we moved on together.
That is so beautiful. And it takes a lot of courage to have that conversation. And you think about, so my kids watch a lot of Marvel movies, right?
Yeah.
So you think about, Robert Downey Jr.'s character and Gwyneth Paltrow's character, Iron Man, and Pepper Potts. And he's, the mad genius in his lab.
Yeah.
I know in tech, as an example, there is no big tech company that makes it over $100 million if you don't have the Pepper. Without
her,
Pepper,
he's a mess.
Yeah, Pepper doesn't have to be a woman, but I'm just like someone who actually can have those conversations, gets things done, gets the results on the board, and that's so key in entrepreneurship. So, which of the 8 businesses, which ones did you sell?
I sold the spas. I sold one gym, and I sold a healthcare tech company. Mm-hmm. This was a company that did RTLS, which is a wireless technology, in nursing homes.
So thinking about selling a business, so one of the things when people come to me and they have an idea, an early question I'll say to them is, what is your exit plan? Is it to sell it? Is it an IPO? Because oftentimes an entrepreneur is so in the business, they're not thinking about that exit. But even how you structure it corporately, legally, all sorts of things really rely on how you intend to exit. But let's talk about something people don't talk about, the emotional aspect of the exit. So how was that for you? I mean, you have over 100 employees,
Traumatic.
Many of whom become like your family, and then now you're selling this business. I'm sure they had uncertainty. How did you handle it emotionally?
These are great lessons to be learned from like tech and institutional investing, because these folks think about it all the time. They don't make an investment without having some kind of 3 to 5 year plan. And small entrepreneurs, I think one thing they miss about people like us. Maybe you think more like an institutional investor now because your companies are so large. But for small guys like me, I want a business to run. I want it to operate. I'm not thinking about an exit when I'm in it because I want income from it, or I want to build an asset. But I learned the hard way when I sold the spas of how it can all go wrong. So I know that a lot of your guests are super successful on the show and you talk about their wins all the time. This is one of my failures. And I'll be vulnerable about that. This is a business that had a lot of value after 5 or 6 years, and I overstayed my welcome. I let the companies go through a cycle where the economy took a downturn and COVID and everything, and I had to exit at a time where I wasn't getting the full value that I wanted. And so it was not just traumatic because I was exiting a business that I loved, but it was also traumatic in that I'd lost an opportunity to exit a business I love and then leverage it into something else. I was protecting myself at that point and just, trying to minimize my downside. And I hope that entrepreneurs can hear that story and the pain in my voice when I tell that story, and just take it as a feather in their, as a red flag to plant in their mind somewhere, to say, okay, maybe I should think about this a few years in advance. Because if you can convince yourself to think about it a few years in advance, at least that's better than waiting until the last minute. And business brokers will tell you this all the time, that when people come to them to sell business, sometimes they're in a hurry, and it kills the whole flow. Like, it's not just upsetting for the staff, it's also upsetting for the owner, and it's not a clean transaction for the buyer either, you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And an M&A can happen really quickly.
Yeah.
And that, I think that this is, we could have this could be an entire workshop, because there's it's like getting a divorce or sending your child off to college, or there's so many, there's so much emotion that goes on here. And another interesting thing, you sort of inspired me just to share this quick story. So we have our largest client for Radius. We have a full-time customer success manager that all they do is face this client. And he is an engineer, and he's a sweetheart. He knows I would call him that. And he never stops working. And I have said to him, what's going to happen when you go on vacation? Well, I don't have a vacation planned. I'm like, well, I'm making you take a vacation. So where are you going? You know, get your wife to plan it. And who is going to take those phone calls and get on the 5 a.m. meetings when you're on vacation? And so the beautiful part of this story is I went to, there are 3 partners, myself and 2 other guys who are in the day-to-day of running this business, like just all in. And I went to them and I said, I'm deeply concerned about him, and we really need someone who can face the customer when he's away. And it changed who we hired next. And so now the happy bright point is he is going to go on vacation. He's going to Germany for 2 weeks. Wow. And I'm so proud of him. And then I went to our customer and I said, this is his blind spot. Will you come alongside me and help him to know that it is okay for him to take this time off? And it's the, I think the biggest thing for an owner, and I want to hear your perspective on this, is thinking about the exit as to what you said. It's not just like so fast. It's to be strategic about it. And if you have a 2-year or 3-year plan to that exit, who do you need to be? How do you need to show up? Who do you need to empower? Where are your gaps? Because if you're building this company to last, which is what you hope, and turning over something wonderful, then that's how you want to think. But I want to hear your perspective. If you could diagnose this, Dr. Randall, so what would the symptoms be that it's time for an owner to leave or step aside?
Yeah, one of them you've touched on, which is really important, and maybe we can exaggerate this one, is that businesses are really fun for an entrepreneur for a period of time. And there comes a point where it becomes fatiguing more than fun. And those are signals that I really recommend that people listen to super carefully, because if you're excited about the next project already, just know that your business is going to suffer unless you have someone inside it who is fired up about this company growing. And sometimes that's the very best thing. I will tell you that my gyms really took off the minute I got out the door. Because I had been grooming someone. I had such a good success rate with the spas with Carolina. I had been grooming someone to help me not be in them every day to day. And they were such a culture warrior. The staff loved working for them. The customers loved having them in the shop. And the minute I was out the door and they were able to take more ownership, the businesses really thrived. So I think that's the first thing, is just check in with yourself about your enthusiasm for being there. Also, I think that businesses are naturally valued in a cycle, right? Like the spas and gyms were temporarily very much devalued because they lost all their customers during COVID, right? And if you're in a situation where you're like, oh, I'm going to sell in a year or two, sometimes a year or two is not enough to let you, weather one of those storms. And so I think that the time to start planning has to be on a little longer horizon than that. Try to think 3 to 5 years if you can, because there are some things, in fact, out of your control that could be just, negative variance, just bad luck, and you want to protect against that.
The wisdom, I want to thank you so much, Todd, and I want all of the listeners to give us the 5-star review on this episode, because you are being so raw and real and authentic, and having the conversation about the things that need to be said, right? Because people see, oh, Elon Musk just invested in Twitter, depending when you're listening to the show, right? Or Elon, he's Tesla, SpaceX, PayPal, is like this series of huge businesses, but Elon has his wall-kicking moments too.
Yeah, and he's one example, right? There are a lot of entrepreneurs out there. If he's the only example you consider, then it's not fair. You're comparing against somebody who's maybe quite different than you, right?
Exactly. I have a friend who sold a company for $300 million. He's my friend Will. He's been on the show, and people wouldn't know his name. And that's there are a lot of people out there. And I know some of you are like, 300 million. Well, that's a whole show, another episode about when you sell your company, all the pieces of the pie that get handed out before you get your little sliver, depending on your dilution. Todd, final question for you. And I know we could talk about so many things. Before the show, I was asking you this question. With your wisdom, 8 businesses, the exits, all of it, we're hearing a lot of talk right now about a coming recession. Now that fear sells news, and we've been hearing about a coming recession for 4 years. And if you took your money out of the market, or if you took it out during COVID, it was a big mistake. And I'm a slow and steady investor, so I just but let's say there is a recession coming. Now that you've built these businesses, you've sold some of these businesses, if you were that guy who had come back from Paris, but it was now, let's say you were in your 30s now, early 30s or 20s, would you be starting a business in this current climate? And if so, what would you start?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a big fan now because I think a person's value to the market as an individual business is just, it's so easy to overcome the gap of what a company's value is to you as a cog in their wheel. Right. So there was a point where I was practicing pharmacy, and it was easy to calculate what I was worth because pharmacists had a value in the market. Right. And for me to start a business, all I had to overcome is what that one salary was going to be. And most businesses, if you have an idea that brings value to the market, just require scale to overcome, that kind of gap. So I recommend, I think starting your own business is a brilliant idea, especially in the market today. Because the tools to start a business are so much more prominent than they were a while ago. Like before, you needed to hire an attorney to start a business, and these days you can go on the internet and, file for an EIN and file for workers' comp insurance and file for payroll help. And there's all kinds of, professionals, attorneys and accountants and other folks that you can hire by the hour or by the project. You don't have to get an office in San Jose, and you don't need seed money from a startup firm. And there are incubators like yours, right? So what a great support structure that is. What a great design concept that is, where someone has a good idea and they just don't know what all the pieces are. And you can take them in with this friendly hug and say, great, you're an expert at this. I've got an assistant right here who can take your phone calls for you. And we have a printer in the lobby, and we have an accountant on staff that can advise you on structure, and you just do you.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's the biggest reason, is that there's so many tools now to start. And then the other thing that I wasn't paying attention to at the time, which I pay a lot more attention to now, which are what are the macro trends. So my spas and gyms were trending downwards over the last 3 years. And that's the reason I went into construction. And my construction businesses have been going absolutely the opposite direction. So, the graphs look like this. And in the middle, your average works out better. So I think follow a macro trend. See something that you think will just bring more value to people 3 years from now than it is today, and jump in that water and see how it feels.
I love that. The macro
and try.
trends.
Just try.
And I think the other thing that I'm so inspired about you is the variety of businesses that you've had, right? And it just comes down to who you are as a person. And I think you're a person I could literally say, okay, Todd, it's 2 a.m. Here's $100,000. Go start a business.
Go.
And you've got to pick an idea out of a hat. I've put 25 ideas in there, and you're like, okay, go. Here we go. I know. First, I'm going to do this. And it's just like, it's incredible. And
may I follow up one comment on this too? Is that business is a set of skills and fundamental premises that you can learn. I used to think that business people were a gift, someone that was born special, and I don't believe that at all anymore. I went and got a very expensive MBA because I didn't have the confidence to start my own business, and it's not been helpful. It helped my confidence, but it's the only thing it helped. All you need to do to start a business is start, and then if there's a skill you don't have, go get it. YouTube's brilliant for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, YouTube University, the kids call it. Yeah, it just goes start. I love it. Yeah. Well, Todd, I want everyone to connect with you. And so how do you prefer they do that?
Yeah, my businesses are all under the umbrella called Beachview. So I have a website called beachview.biz, B-I-Z. Also, I mostly connect with coaching and consulting clients on Facebook. It just has a really good tool for that. And so if you go to Facebook, I have a Facebook group called Real Business Coaching. And that's the next best way to reach me, is Real Business Coaching in Facebook groups. And there's all kinds of content up there so people can learn something about me before they reach out to me if they like.
I love it. Well, Todd, thank you so much for being on Raw and Real Entrepreneurship.
Thanks, Susan. Great to talk to you.
And definitely keeping it raw and real.
Thanks.
All right, everyone. Well, this has been another episode in the books. And if you've heard about something in this episode and you want to find out more, don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And if this episode has been helpful, inspiring, which we hope it has, please go ahead, share on social, tag Todd and I, and on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, wherever it is you're on social, you'll probably find us. So with that, God bless, go rock your day, and I will see you in a future episode.